90s, role-playing as mutant turtles was all the rage in my primary school playground. I remember wanting to play Donatello. I think there's a very nerdy kind of astrology around which turtle you wanted to be, so read into that what you wish. But beside that, and a couple of other similar cartoons that were on at the time, that's really all the exposure I had to mutant animals. I never got into comic books and didn't get into tabletop role-playing until 20 years later, so I completely missed the mutant RPG scene of the 90s Palladium games like TMNT and Other Strangeness, and its follow-up After the Bomb. In fact, I was barely aware of their existence until Julian Kay contacted me about Mutants in the Now and its expansion, Mutants in the Next, a retro-modern homage to those games about mutant animals in a hostile world, not just surviving, but looking cool while doing it. Something I love about the RPG scene is how, no matter how immersed in it you are, there's always a new sub-community you can stumble into. And that's something I want to stress for this review, that I'm an outsider looking into this world, that there might be some nuances I miss. I don't know exactly how those 90s games worked, and I can't really judge if Mutants in the Now is a fitting homage. I can only give you the perspective of a newcomer to that scene. But even for an outsider like me, there's something very compelling about mutants with attitude. I'm not sure it's just nostalgia either, because maybe feeling like an outsider might have a lot to do with it. There's a grungy classic feel to the books that immediately makes you feel like you've picked up a reprint of something from the 90s. It reminds me a lot of my copy of Cyberpunk 2020, the early 90s version with its scrappy feel. When you compare it to the modern Cyberpunk Red, hopefully you'll see what I mean. So as soon as you pick it up, Mutants in the Now is already trying to make you feel like it's a classic, something you discovered in a second-hand bookshop. The typewriter typeface and monotone art also contribute to that feel. Art isn't really the point, but there's some fun characters scattered around the book, like the heroes on the front cover and the villains in the back. I particularly enjoyed this cyberpunk budgie. As for the rest of the layout, I find it surprisingly easy to read. And as you might expect from a mutant game, the entire first half of the core book is dedicated to character creation, then a quarter for the rules, and a quarter for the GM and antagonists section. So, before we get to that main focus of character creation, I'll talk briefly about the rules. Mutants in the Now splits its mechanics into two distinct rule sets: dramatic rules and fighting rules. You might be familiar with this approach if you've played modern tactical games like Lancer, but I think it's similar to how those old Palladium Megaversal games work too. So let's start with the dramatic rules. These are relatively simple compared to the fighting rules. At a basic level, it uses a roll under percentile system. So you have a percentage value for each skill to represent how good you are at that specific ability, and making a check is as simple as rolling a d100. If you roll equal to or under your skill percentage, you succeed. How you determine what your skill percentage is, though, is a bit more complex. It depends on whether it's a package skill, a hobby skill, a specialty skill, or an untrained skill, and which two attributes govern that skill. If you like the sound of that so far, you'll be happy to hear there are 83 named skills in the book, from astronomy to skiing, and from livestock to skating. And if that's not enough, you can create more as well. There's a few other mechanics in dramatic play, like clues, a little meta-currency for investigating mysteries, and contacts, like red-haired reporters, for example, who are more mundane human sidekicks that you can ask for help. Moving on to fight play, and we have a lot more rules. Notably, we switch from a percentile roll under system to a d20 roll over system. And despite the heaviness of the rules, I doubt it's too steep a learning curve if you've tried any other rulesy d20 systems like Pathfinder or Lancer. You roll initiative, and then there's a flexible 2-action economy where on your turn you can perform any 2 different actions. You'll have a fighting style, a weapon, and possibly psionic abilities that each enable specific maneuvers in combat, and there are a whole host of states and statuses to manage. Like I said, it seems quite complex at first, and you'll be checking tables now and then to make sure you're doing things right, like adding the correct damage dice from your weapon, your strength score, and your size rating, that kind of thing. It feels intentionally old-fashioned in that respect, but it's no more complex than those other rulesy systems I mentioned. The world of mutants in the now is similar to our own, but the mysterious substance called goop has created an exploited underclass of mutant animals. You are one of those mutant animals. Creating a mutant is one of the highlights, and it's a fun game just on its own. Again, I'm going to be glossing over a lot of the details because it's quite in-depth and involves a lot of dice rolling. But the entire first half of the book holds your hand and guides you through the process. And so I'm going to be talking about it for a few minutes at least. Step 1 is deciding what kind of group you're going to play. A diverse group where all players roll their characters separately. A connected group where you all share a background and source of mutation. Or a family group where everyone came from the same starting species before they mutated. Step 2, cursing your dice, just assigns a number of take-back points that you can spend to re-roll things later. Step 3 has you rolling for your initial attribute scores, rolling 4d6 for each of 8 attributes, roughly divided into 4 mental and 4 physical attributes. If you're thinking that sounds a bit old-fashioned and unfair, well, the worse you roll at this stage, the more goop points you have to spend on mutations later. Step 4 determines the reason you mutated, your background, and your starting species by guiding you on a journey through various many coded tables. There are 135 possible species you can end up on in the core book, each with their own set of traits and goop points. But before you get into that, you need to move on to Step 5, mutating, where you can spend your goop points to progress through trees to become more human-like and unlock animalistic traits and abilities that your species might allow for. So, for example, if you rolled a great white shark, you're probably going to want the ability to breathe air and to invest in bipedal movement. Then you might want the ability to grasp tools and objects and possibly to speak. Then you consider how human-like your appearance is, whether you might pass for a person with unusually sharp teeth, or if you just look like a 9-foot-tall walking, talking shark. And only then might you consider the special abilities you might buy, like Swift Swimmer, Blood Scent and Electroreception, or the Deadly Bite ability. Or maybe you want the psionic power to launch yourself in the air or something. If you're not too overwhelmed at this point, you'll move on to Step 6, where you choose your fighting style, from a disciplined taijutsu to improvisational panic, and each comes with abilities, bonuses, and maneuver unlocks. But then in step 7, we're on to skills, where you choose a skill package that grants more bonuses and specific skills to train. But it's not over yet, because you need to decide on your hobby skills, as well as which is your specialty skill, before we move on again to step 8, stuff, where you'll choose various items, gimmicks, wealth, and weapons depending on your background and training. Is that it? No, step 9 asks you to finalize your derived stats and values, and based on the CTCT score that you picked up somewhere along the way, you need to create a number of human contacts. And then that's it. You have a character. It could be anything. A tiny octopus with a water-breathing suit and tentacles full of knives. A psychic giant muscle weasel who uses their Brazilian jiu-jitsu training and spider senses to win MMA fights, or just a cat person who looks like a person who can see in the dark quite well. And all of this has associated mechanics. So what now? Well, I guess you play the game. Perhaps you're a group of crime fighters, or you're just trying to escape the labs of opportunistic corporations. Either way, you'll likely face off against larger-than-life villains like the Bad Boys, indoctrinated mutant hunters acquiring new assets for Proteus Inc., or Kuro and Tokotsu, gangsters who appropriate ninja stylings, or even beings from other dimensions. And perhaps the most important modernization from comic book heroes of the 90s is the reminder that these low-level baddies are victims of larger crimes that affect everyone, and that while martial arts action is fun, the real villains of Mutants in the Now are as mundane as they are in the real world. Since character creation is the star of the show, it makes sense that Mutants in the Next really piles up the mutant content, adding another 144 species, bringing the total up to 279 by my count, and including some rare and weird options like Space Monkey and Unicorn. But apart from sheer numbers, I really appreciated how Mutants in the Next guides you through character creation again, with the extra optional features highlighted. Human-born mutants, mutant ages, mundane humans, wild mutations, and scientific species only, so you can easily select which extra options to plug into your campaign. On top of all that, there are additional traits, psionic powers, and fighting styles like hockey and pro wrestling, more skill packages, weapons, and gimmicks. We're actually already ahead of the core book's total page count just with the extra character options. I absolutely loved the last third of the expansion though, which really builds on the lore of the world, adding fun new characters to the existing factions, and adding an especially fun new one, the Doom Toons of Sal Sidney, a Randian entrepreneur with an animation studio and a desire to found an objectivist city-state in a swamp run by industrialists and great men. He had his brain frozen on death, which was later mutated and resurrected by the goop. The result is a kind of BioShock meets Five Nights at Freddy's, fittingly wrapped in a Disney skin. It's really something. And finally, there's an adventure to run, Tully's Monster, about investigating the disappearance of forgotten people who fell through the city's cracks. One of my absolute favourite tropes in urban fantasy. I'm skipping my usual section of minor gripes here, because despite Mutants in the Now not really being my usual kind of thing, I like to judge a game based on what it's trying to achieve. And Mutants in the Now nails it. It feels like a 90s RPG in every way, from its presentation to the slight awkwardness of all the derived stats. And it feels exactly like a mutant hero cartoon or comic as well, with layers of self-aware silliness and parody tied together with love. And as an outsider to the scene, I find it difficult to fault. Like I said, I can only give you an outsider's perspective, and if you're an outsider to the scene too, then maybe you'd find the rules and sheer number of tables overwhelming compared to more modern design principles. But that style is intentional, and I know that, because Julian K also sent me another game of theirs, Faith and Sales, which I'm not reviewing, at least not in this video, but it's a modern GM-less story game that fits on two sides of card like this. It has all the streamlining you'd expect from that kind of thing. And so, if Julian and the other contributors wanted to design a streamlined story game about mutant animals, I'm sure they would have done. But instead, they paid loving homage to those games that Mutants in the Now is inspired by. Interestingly, after writing that last paragraph, I read the special thanks in the back of Next, which says, "As a designer, I originally thought in terms of efficient design, but designing Mutants in the Now changed my mind. Having so many diverse elements lets you create a character that's truly all your own. It's unlikely that two people could create the same character in Now, and in Next, it's practically inconceivable." There are two kinds of mutant fans this game is for. Those who fondly remember the 90s games, and those who are only now discovering that the scene exists. And the chances are that if you're one of those people, your reaction on seeing this was, as Julian puts it, "Man, how'd I not know about this?" Thank you ever so much for watching, and as usual, a special massive thank you to this month's Ko-fi supporters. I'm super happy with the reception that the previous video on playstyles got. I was a little nervous because it's a potentially divisive topic, but that video took the channel over 5,000 subscribers, which will really help get eyes on those lesser known games that deserve more eyeballs. And if you haven't seen them, by the way, I put up a couple of polls about some of the suggestions I've received, so head to the post tabs to vote on what games should get those eyeballs in the next few months. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe to discover a new game every couple of weeks or so. Until then, happy adventures!